Yes, so good evening everyone, and thank you for joining us for this encounter with Ngone Pal. Ngone has been our resident for almost 3 weeks now. And well, normally we would do a long introduction, but in fact the purpose of the evening is first and foremost to introduce Ngone to you in a more detailed and in-depth and meaningful way than the kind of standard 2 minutes long biography would do. Ngone is a curator, a writer, an architect, an editor, a cultural policy maker, originally from Dakar, but based in Paris for a long time. And I will stop with the sort of like basic introduction here, and I will pass it to Ngone to really start with the very rich and complex story of her life. So I would like to pose the first question, basically, how was your professional and personal, because one can never really make a good perfect separation between the two. So how was your parcours from your studies and from the beginning of your career in the milieu of Dakar at the time? And I hope you will speak a little bit about that as well, because we had a long conversation about you actually as being very young and being in the proximity of some great cultural figures of the post-colonial Europe of Senegal.
So good evening. Thank you. How long do we have so I don't talk for too much? No?
It's okay.
It's okay. Even from Dakar, we can talk a lot. So thank you for coming. I thought it would be more interesting because I'm a complete outsider. If you think of somebody who has been trained as a curator or trained as an artist, and what does that mean? But if you understand my background and my context, there's a logic in where I am today, step by step. So this is just an aerial view of downtown Dakar. It's in Senegal, and we are on the most western point of the African continent, in West Africa, and the city itself is a peninsula. So there's a microclimate. Dakar was also the capital of the entire French colonies in West Africa. But as a city, it wasn't a colony, it was a French city. So it makes it very specific, meaning that all the population, all the people who were born and who were living in Dakar were French citizens, regardless where they came from. And then the rest of Senegal was a colony. So it makes Dakar something very specific. The microclimate is local, the geographic situation at the far west of the continent. It was also the entry point of the explorers, starting with the Portuguese, who first discovered from the ocean the African coast. So Dakar was their entry point. And so Dakar, you have layers. Well, here you don't see anymore a lot of these colonial buildings. There's probably only this one that is now left, and this is part of what we call the Independence Square. And you can see the ocean because of the peninsula, so we have the ocean on the three sides. But what is interesting in Dakar is because of this microclimate that will have like 10 degrees difference with the rest of the country. The fact that it was a French city, meaning that my parents, my grandparents, and my great-grandparents were both French, even if they were black. And on my mother's side, my grandfather was a colonial officer, and he was based in Mali, the neighboring country. So when people are talking about colonial trauma, post-colonial trauma, as somebody from Dakar, it's difficult to understand because there is no experience of that, even as a Senegalese. And because it's a very old city, so there's also a very old urban lifestyle. And because of its geographic location, so the Portuguese discovered it, then it was taken over by the British, then finally the French took it and built the city. But before the Europeans arrived, there was a lot of trade going on with North Africa, with the caravans. So there's also a huge Arab culture that is imprinted in the Senegalese culture, and specifically Dakar. So Dakar is a kind of a weird place. Because when you think of United States, they say like think of Texas or Midwest, and then you compare it to New York, that is a completely different environment. But what was interesting also is that at independence in 1960, the first president was a poet, and he decided to use culture as a tool for nation building. So he organized with other Senegalese intellectuals and also intellectuals from the French Antilles, mythical festival in 1966 that was called the World Festival of Black Arts. So it's very, very mythical. And he built a big modern art museum. It was the first modern art museum in French-speaking West Africa, with big exhibitions. For instance, the first show of Picasso on the continent was hosted in that museum in Dakar in the 70s, and Picasso came for the opening. So there was this kind of French-Senegalese diplomacy to bring modern art from France to Dakar during those days. And I grew up downtown, and I currently live just behind this building. You see this construction? Now it's a tall building, and that's where I live, but I grew up in this area of Dakar. And I grew up so surrounded by generations of artists who were trying to be part of this nation building, being Senegalese, being African, because Pan-Africanism as a cultural, as a political ideology, like one continent, one people, one destiny, that is something also very strong, with a continental organization called the African Union, that has its headquarters in Ethiopia, that was implemented in 63. So you grew up with this kind of brainwash. No, you're not from Dakar. No, you're not Senegalese. You're African. And any other African people that you meet on this huge continent of 54 countries is your brother or your sister. So there's a strong sense of brotherhood and comradeship. So that was also the kind of political statement that Senegal did in 66 by having this festival, but also inviting what the president was calling the sons and daughters we lost, so African Americans, British Americans, and all the creative people from the Caribbean also came, and some of them were offered Senegalese citizenship, especially the Haitian writers, and they stayed. So this is just to give you a context on where I grew up. So art is something quite familiar to me, especially the visual arts.
But maybe it would be good to a little bit to name these artists that you consider this media. It would be good to have like a brief introduction and mentioning of who these people were.
Well, okay,
like
so, yes, so it's a group mainly of men, of course, born in the 50s. So at the independence of Senegal in 1960, they were kind of 10 years old. So in the 70s, where there was this cultural research about what does it mean to be African and modern, how do you embrace Pan-Africanism personally. So it was a group basically of visual artists, filmmakers, and novelists. That was the core group, and they also had their, I would say, their headquarters, also here in downtown Dakar, in the yard of one of the Senegalese artists called Issa Sam, but his nickname is Joe Wakam. And so they were experimenting on intellectual level, theory-based, and also practice-based. So the first crazy performances, at that time we didn't know what the performance was, but a lot of so it was a space, for me as a kid, because I lived in that street, it was a place where everything was possible, and that was a strong sense of freedom. So they also had a strong impact, not just on the cultural scene in the city, but also in the entire West African region. Most of them passed away because I think they just burned their life from the two sides, too much alcohol and drugs. But amazing filmmakers like Djibril Mambeti, singers, and of course one of the remaining guys of that group is the owner of the yard, Joe Wakam, who is now like a myth because his place was described in exhibition and in art books in the 90s. So from us, that was, oh, okay, yes, there was this place where people were experimenting. But, you know, I think it always takes somebody who comes from outside to tell you the value of what you have. When it's in front of you, you think it's something obvious. So I had to rethink also the impact of these people, not just on the landscape, but the impact they had on myself as a young girl in the 70s. But my dream was to become an architect, so I had no doubt about it, and that's what I did. So I went to Paris, I studied architecture, and it was a dream come true. I was very happy, but my dissertation when I graduated was a museum on the history of Africa and how the movement of people, especially Africans taking the slave trade as a starting point, how those people who travel impacted other cultures. So of course jazz in America would be the most obvious connection, but there are many, many other layers. So I spent 2 years in library. It was before the digital revolution. I'm from old school. I'm talking about the 80s. And it was fascinating to unfold all these different layers of history of the past and the present, and how all these cultures are interconnected. What we think is so specific about Dakar, but then you see the borrowings from the Moroccans, borrowed also from Spain, because back in the 7th century, this part of Senegal was in the same part of the same empire that was stretching from Senegal to Andalusia in Spain. So you just unfold, and when you think that you are unique, you just realize that you are just, an addition of layers of culture. So that's what I wanted to explore with my dissertation, so I did a museum. And of course, because I was exposed to modern art in those days, for me it was something obvious to have the input of artists in it. And after I graduated, I started practicing as an architect, and then I received a phone call from a French architect who wanted to meet me because he saw my dissertation project. And I was also interested to meet him because he is an architect who in the 70s was based in Mali, neighboring country of Senegal, and did a lot of public buildings like the National Museum, the French Institute. And I really liked his method and his style as an architect. And then meeting him, I realized that it's the same guy who started the first contemporary African art magazine 2 years ago. And basically he asked me, he said that they were going to expand and to turn out into a publishing house and to publish also monographs on artists. And in the context of Europe and in the West, in the early 90s, there was a very strong assumption that Africa didn't have contemporary art. It sounds crazy today to think about that, but that was very clear in the mind of the international art world. There was no contemporary art in Africa, and when we think about contemporary art, it will be the mass or the craft. And so, because he lived in West Africa, he wanted to prove that it wasn't true, because he also had a lot of good friends who are very respected artists today, people like Abdoulaye Konate. So that's why he started this magazine, and did it in a very basic way, going country by country. So one issue would be on Bamako in Mali, one issue on Senegal, etc. Just doing the research before internet. If you don't go to those countries, you have no idea what's happening. And he needed somebody just to take it over, and he offered me to take it over. So I realized that if somebody was crazy enough to pay me to travel and discover this huge continent, and to experiment and research and to meet also the protagonists of independence, that was only 30 years ago, that was priceless. So I quit my job as an architect and started learning from the ground what does it mean to become an architect. So I learned that from the ground, and so going to those countries, meeting these people, you also understand the importance of the context when it's attached to artistic production. Because what artists were doing in Senegal is different from what artists were doing in South Africa or in East Africa, etc. And of course, we're running a magazine, so you start writing, and then so you start thinking about the context, you start also doing exhibitions. And because you have this kind of knowledge by default that nobody has, because you've been going to all those countries, then institutions will approach you saying, we're implementing this cultural policy, or we want to assess a program we've been running in that country. You know the country, you know the context, so maybe you can advise us. So that's how I started being involved into cultural policies for European Union, for the African Union, for governments, or for foundations such as the Rockefeller Foundation. So that's the brief where I come from and why I'm a complete outsider with all these different hats.
Maybe just a couple of minutes about Revue Noire and sort of like the great contribution that you made there, and also like about the about Revue Noire and the contribution it had in a very particular moment of the sort of aggregation of practices that were happening throughout Africa, and in a particular global moment where local practices and regional practices started to be put together and looked at it as one narrative, or as narratives that would be compared and sort of put in the same framework. So it would be great if you can a little bit talk about that.
Yes, well, so as I said, I met these two French architects who were starting this first contemporary African art magazine from Paris, but then every 3 months. It was a quarterly issue by language French-English. It's true that today it's something that is like a myth because it was the first one. And it lasted for 10 years until 2001. They started in 91 and I joined in 93. And because we were traveling on the continent, so we had the knowledge by default, and also the power. Information was power, it was before internet. So we had huge archives because whenever we were going to a country, we would sit down in that country for at least 3 weeks to a month and set up a local editorial team. So we will hire young writers, we will hire journalists, we will hire photographers to take photos, paper photos or with rolls or slides. And we will collect all the information to student visit, meet intellectuals, dancers, choreographers, writers, etc. Because the magazine was covering all the different artistic disciplines. And sometimes we would add a CD if we felt that the music scene was amazing. So on top of the magazine, you would be offered a CD. And because of them, we were coming back to produce and print the magazine in Paris before distributing it worldwide. So we had all this knowledge and all these invaluable archives. So of course, whoever was interested in that time in what was happening in Africa, your entry port would be contacting coming to the office or sending a fax. In those days, it was a fax or giving a phone call. And yes, so that was something specific in a time where the art scene was saying there's no contemporary art, and just by doing it and by going to places and meeting people who are saying there is contemporary art. And it's also a time in the early 90s where for the West, international show would be Europe, America, and maybe 1 or 2 Japanese artists. And that was an international show. And so you were kind of swimming against the current because we were focusing 100% on the continent. So almost nobody was interested. I hear today some discourse or some speeches or some statements like Africa is high. I'm like, seriously, that's the deepest insult to people like myself, because I'm not the only one. We're there on the ground, in tough conditions, in the 90s, with little budget, talking to people, meeting amazing people. I had the most inspiring, challenging, fascinating conversations with the freedom fighters of the independence war in Angola. And all of them were top rank officers, like one was the general authority, the other one was the boss of the secret services. And I was staying with them because they all studied at the Dakar University, so they were speaking French. Because Senegal was involved in a lot of underground secret political networks, because we got independence first, and it was a small country, and because of this sense of brotherhood, helped the other countries to become independent. So I can't go into that, but there's a fascinating underground network throughout the continent of people who studied together in Paris, if they were French-speaking, or in London, if they were English-speaking, and all of them went back in the late 50s on the continent, and so they were the first generation of African leaders. But they stayed in touch before internet. We're talking about the 60s. So it was fascinating to see that these Portuguese freedom fighters, Portuguese speaking from Angola, I became this kind of hero the moment they realized I was from Senegal, because they say, I am who I am because of your country, because your country gave me scholarship. I went to Dakar, I studied at the biggest French-speaking university, blah, 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 blah. So they pulled out the red carpet and they told me all the secret information about these networks, etc. So those moments were fascinating. So people admired us, because we were contributing in that way, but also other people hated us because we had the information that's therefore the power by default. But I used to say, don't apologize. I mean, why should we apologize? It was the power by default. But we did it, so just thank us for having done it. You could also contribute in your way. So that's why this magazine was important. And when today, 20 years later, some people say Africa is hype or Africa is the new fashion, we're talking about one of the oldest continents with very old civilizations. So I just think it's, if I'm, let's be polite to say it's naive, not to say it's completely so stupid that it's embarrassing even to hear. And I did write for Contemporary and that website a statement after the Venice Biennial in Angola, where all these judges said, oh, Africa is hype. I said, okay, I understand, let's go for a tree. I'm not talking. And so they asked me to write a statement, and I wrote a statement about how sweet these Western journalists were, and maybe I should thank them that finally they acknowledge me as a person from Africa, and now that I'm hype, and maybe I should even think about the way I dress, because I'm this kind of nice and sweet exotic fruit. So yes, so it just shows how little people spend time doing their research, and that's basically about journalists, as if we're constantly reinventing the wheel. Whenever you start, you think you're great and you want to be great, but have the humility and intellectual honesty to acknowledge that there is not just one, but 10,000 of generations before you. And if you're not aware of that, and if you don't consider the contribution of the generations before you, you're not going to go anywhere. So just to make it brief about Revue Noire, how important it was, and it's still used as a reference for young scholars who want to research on modern and contemporary art. They take it as a starting point for their research, including people who are doing masters or PhD on artistic production from the continent. Yeah, and so I was happy to be one of the protagonists who sat down for 10 years and wrote the history of modern and contemporary art.
So let's move closer to the present, and let's talk a bit about some of your curatorial projects.
Yes, so after 2000 I decided to become independent. You wanted to add something?
No.
Yes, so after we closed Revue Noire, because we were completely exhausted, and it was at the turn of the millennium, and we were talking about, and I just woke up and said, because we were a very small team. Actually, full-time working on Revue Noire, we were 3 people. The artistic director, myself, and the graphic designer. So we were 3 doing the quarterly issue bilingual magazine before internet. So even the time that it takes to produce it, doing some presentations in Paris, some small exhibitions, some talks, and also the books. A book on the history of African photography, 400 pages. A book on the history of contemporary art, 400 pages. Monographs. So I was completely burned out. I think it was the most exciting years in my life, but I was young. But after 10 years, I just realized that, that my professional life was great, but I was completely exhausted, burned out, and I just needed a break. So I just told them, I want to keep on being friends with you, because we were living really like a club, it was really, and sometimes people refer to Revue Noire as if it was one person, knowing that, and we had that discussion, that we are very different personalities, like 3 coming from architecture, 1 who used to be a writer, and another one that nobody ever mentions, which is Bruno Tiet, who was also a French journalist who was based in Niger, in West Africa. And we had very different personalities. The 2 architects and Bruno were 16 years older than me. Simon Jamy, the writer, was 6 years older than me, so I was the youngest. The only I would say, that was in her early mid-20s. So with less experience, whether in architecture or in other forms. And yes, and being the only woman also was something interesting, that I was running this magazine, I was young and I was doing it, so they used to refer to me as Madame B. And we used to joke, is it B for boss or B for bitch? Or B for Browns? So then I said, okay, it's the Madame B3, so that's fine. But I needed a break from all that, and then I started to do a lot of consultancy on cultural policies, especially for EU and for other organizations in Brussels. And then I was frustrated by Dakar because we have also one of the oldest contemporary art biennial on the continent. The oldest one is the Cairo Biennial that started in '84, and Dakar started in '91. So it's the second one. And other countries have tried. South Africa tried twice in the mid-90s to have a biennial, but they killed themselves. But South Africa, we need a month to talk about that country because it's too specific. Marrakesh started a biennial, so those are the three main visual art biennials on the country. But Cairo is dying because of the political situation. But what happened with that museum where Picasso and Soulages had an exhibition in the 70s, the government shut it down. So we woke up thinking that we are the best people on this continent because we are like the heaven for any creative person. Almost all the intellectuals went through the Dakar University. We have the best intellectuals. We are the best. That's what we believe because we come from this tiny little peninsula, and then we think that we are unique. So we were able to lobby with the government, and we got the biennial as a compensation, and it was voted in Parliament in '89. But there is no museum. So how can you be a country? You have an art school, very old one. You have a contemporary biennial that is starting, but nowhere to show art. So I decided to start showing art in the public domain. And I also wanted to reconnect with my old profession that was being an architect. So I started making deals with the city of Dakar to occupy the gardens and the parks and to just put contemporary art in the public domain and to tell to the average people, you don't need a PhD in art history to understand contemporary art, and let's talk about the issues behind the work. And I thought that the best way to do it was just to do it in the public domain. So this is from the cute part, and so this is Dakar on a daily basis. It's becoming an open air market, so this would be like for you to shop. And this is one part of the biggest market that is downtown. The crazy thing about our understanding of what is a public space, it belongs to nobody. It belongs to everybody. So I can take, let's say, 1 square meter of it and do my business, whether I'm selling clothes, whether I'm selling furniture, whether I'm selling donuts or coffee, or even cooking or selling and cooking the donuts in the street. So from this cute colonial town, that looks like a postcard when you look at it from that specific angle, all day long you're exhausted negotiating with the street sellers. Like you park your car, you come back 2 hours later, and it's covered with clothes. And then you have to negotiate and beg with the owner of the seller that he removes his products so you can take your car and leave because your car now became his shop. And you have to negotiate that, like you can't just steal. So everything on the public domain is this kind of negotiation. And I thought it would be interesting to add another layer of negotiation and what the city has to offer to any passerby, and that would be contemporary art. So that was the reason for a group of friends, 2 art artists who have been doing research on new media art and digital art the moment internet arrived in Dakar. Because also Dakar, because of its geographic location, we were the first to have internet in West Africa. So that's another layer of us thinking that we are so special, so unique, and that's why we're arrogant, and I'm trying not to be arrogant here, but believe me, we are. And so the first internet cafe opened in Dakar as well. So we just decided as a group, some are engineers, some are hackers, just to start this very informal guerrilla collective that we will not register because nobody wanted to become a bureaucrat and we were busy doing something else. Let's add another layer to what the city has to offer, and that offer will be art. So this is another area where you can buy a souvenir from Africa if you're a tourist, but it's in the street because the market has expanded so much that now it's in the street. And the different mayors of Dakar have been struggling to kick them out, and that we can reclaim this cute, easygoing colonial city/lifestyle. But so every time he tries, the mayor, then there are riots. So, and we are complaining like, this is interesting because it tells you the process of the production with these young artists. That's what we put the emphasis on. So, and out of this Bottle Boy project, so these artists, after like 2 months of workshops and discussions about what was he going to do with this mineral water, etc. So he wrote, he made this small drawing, and he wrote in French. He said, "Finally, I have an idea that I didn't understand before." So just about what is contemporary art, what is your process, Because also the art school didn't upgrade the curriculum, so it's more about the techniques and not really about content, research, and theory. So this is just a background about when I'm in Dakar. This is what I will be doing, underground stuff, mainly in the suburbs, and then doing a pop-up exhibition or event, even lecture at a street corner, and then the mayors just say, come on guys, please stop behaving like possibly. I can give you the board for free for 2 weeks, or for 2 days. So that's how we started this informal also partnership with the city, and now to put art officially in the streets. And so this is one of the artists with whom we used to collaborate. He's a self-taught photographer. He's from Burkina Faso. That is another country in West Africa, but he's based in Dakar. And all of these youngsters in the suburbs, they are really like graffiti people, rap singers, spoken words, hip-hop dancers, bloggers. They occupied the city of Dakar for 9 months between 2011 and 2012 because the government, the president at that time wanted to change the constitution to run for a third mandate. They occupied the city for 9 months, blocked the economy, and took him down. Just by occupying and by maintaining a block, so they were, and the movement became Yanama. It means we're fed up. And because some of them are young fashion designers, so they did these T-shirts and they went with a car and a bus in all the countryside, especially, explained to the young people who are turning 18 the importance to vote, what does citizenship mean, what does democracy mean. Senegal, one of the oldest democracy on this continent, we're not going to allow the president to change the constitution. And then the movement was joined, of course, by the civil society and then by other politicians who said, okay, you're right, to a point that when Obama did his official visit in Africa, he stopped in Dakar and said, I want to meet these guys. And the guy said, well, but we're in the suburbs, you better come because we're not going to the American embassy. So Obama had with his delegation and all the Secret Service had to go to the suburbs, and the president felt very, very stupid. So Siaka is one of these guys, and almost all of them are self-taught, didn't go to any art school, but are just without any complex, just producing stuff. So we try to give them a frame and a platform to discuss what they want to do and to show it. So beyond that, I have my 3 personal obsessions as an individual, and one of them is history. Because of that research I was doing for my dissertation about the history of the continent and how it's connected to the rest of the world. So I just realized a few years ago that I've been really turning around 3 main issues: history, geography, and politics. And history and geography, that has to do with my research, with my dissertation, my architecture project, and politics because my father was 30 at the independence of Senegal, so he was one of the witnesses and the protagonists, and discussing politics was something extremely banal in my house in Dakar, and I believe that politics is everywhere, even if you're not interested in politics. Leaders will implement a new rule, and you will have to live with it, so it impacts your life. So politics is everywhere, you don't have to agree, but that's what I believe. So history, I'm fascinated by history. I think if I didn't do architecture, maybe I would have become an historian. And so a lot of my projects, I do a lot of research specifically on history. And I'm just going to show you briefly, essentially artists from the continent, because you might not be familiar with them. Whether it's artists I respect, I've worked with some of them. All of the people I'm going to show, I published them in the 90s, so I know them all personally. And Jane Alexander, is a South African who did this iconic triptych that is now at the entrance of the National Gallery in Cape Town, called the Butcher Boys. And if you're familiar with the history of South Africa and apartheid, and so she was part of the artists who were doing this, what became later known, called by the historians as the resistance art movement, so using art as a tool for protest and resistance. And so she was part of that with this. It's a little bit more than a lifestyle, but a little bit more. They will be a little bit bigger than Cosby, who's already a tall man. So it's a very impressive, and at when she did that later on, only in the 80s, but it's at the end of apartheid that most of us were able to go to South Africa because it was a no-go zone, because we're black on this continent. That we really discovered this work, and it became the kind of icon and symbol of the South African struggle against apartheid from the artistic point of view. This is another also South African artist, woman as well, who was really deeply involved, and she's the one who did this publication called Resistance Art in South Africa that I think was published in 93 or something like that. I think maybe you can find it secondhand on Amazon or something like that. But it's really a reference about 2 generations of visual artists who have been really producing as activists. And this work is interesting, called For 30 Years Next to His Heart, because in South Africa, the black people and the color, to enter the white zone, they needed a passport. And so, and at any time, because they would go to work as maids for the white people, but at 5 o'clock, they have to leave that area and go back to their own area because it was segregated. So they needed a pass in their own country, in their own city, to enter the white territory. And so they would hold it in the pocket of their shirt. And at the end of apartheid, some of them didn't know what to do with it and couldn't even get rid of it. And some of them decided to throw it away, some of them decided to burn it, but a few men, including this one, just decided to keep it for his kids and granddaughters and grandchildren to know how life was in those days. So he kept it like a kind of evidence. And Sue Williamson did kind of scan all the pages and did this work that is, I think it's now in the MoMA collection, that is called For 30 Years Next to His Heart. Next to his house physically, but very far away from his heart. This is also an interesting, it's a video by Andrew Potter, who was trying to look at South African history, but from a non-white perspective. Because of the apartheid regime, the history of South Africa, that was, the power was in the hands of the white people, and the history of South Africa was a white history, and just ignore that they were in a land that had a history before, that had people here, that had kingdoms, etc. But at the end of apartheid, a lot of people got confused. Okay, so now I'm African. Now I have to reconnect with this continent that we're separated from. But what is my identity? So they had almost 15 years of discussions and trauma about what is my identity. The government is saying this is a rainbow nation, what does it mean? And I remember myself and other curators, we decided we're no longer going to South Africa because we know who we are, we know our history. And if the only conversation with people in the art world is about identity, then just deal with your own shit. And figure it out yourself, because we know who we are. And Andrew, what I'm interested in, Andrew, so of course he's a white male, and he did this piece just perverting history. That's also what I'm interested in. Look, artists are looking at history as an evidence and reflecting on it, but also artists questioning official history and what we consider as truth, how the leaders write history and how they, make the identity of the nation. So it looks like an old painting, and when you start arriving, it's a very dark room because it's meant to look like an old painting. And suddenly, the character, the woman, she will wake, and then she will start singing a lullaby song in Xhosa. That is the local language in Western Cape. And the idea, and she was the wife of the governor. So he invented this story that the wife of the governor, in 700 something, adopted a black child. And to be able to, because she couldn't give birth. It's fake, but for him that was his point. And to be able to interact with the child that she adopted, she learned Xhosa, because none of the South Africans, of course, were interested in any South African native languages. So none of them can speak Zulu, Xhosa, Tikui, or whatsoever. So it's a very simple, so you think it's an old painting, you approach, she waits, she sings this song very, you have to even put your ear, and then it stops. And it's called Secretly I Will Love You More. And when he did that, It was released in 2007, part of an exhibition that I was involved in. It became a kind of huge buzz, and then people were having discussions about my culture versus your culture, like your white culture, your white British culture, or your culture as an African, my culture as a Zulu, my culture as a Xhosa. If we're all from the same country, but we don't speak the same languages and we don't understand each other. So it also then became a kind of icon of questioning the official history that was told, and that it was time maybe for need that, rejection of all that and try to reinvent a past taken from fiction or for facts. So that's Andrew. People who are also interested from history, but this is just because I really in love with this video from Yuki from Samoa. She lives part of the year in New Zealand, and she's in the coming Asia Pacific Triennale. And this is a video she did. It's life-size, silent, where she puts on Victorian period dress, and she's dancing the traditional Samoa and Pacific dances. And it's again about this clash of cultures and layers of history that are not being told, wrongly told, or being denied. So there are many different layers in this very, very simple, and the video is done in a way that she starts dancing, and the more she does movements, the more it multiplies. So at the end, you don't know if it's a ghost, if it's shadows, or if it's an army of women. And she's from Samoa. There's no doubt about physically that she looks like somebody from the Pacific. But wearing this Victorian dress is also about questioning, what does it mean to be somebody from the Pacific? What does it mean to be from a former British colony and based in New Zealand and always being pointed out, you don't belong here, what does that mean? So that's also something interesting. And I had very fascinating conversations with her. I met her in Belgium. And I wish I can work with her when they retried, but that famous project was cancelled. But yes, so it's my interest in history and how artists are thinking, looking, questioning, reinventing history. She's one of the artists I'm keeping an eye on her, I would say. Another artist who questioned the history of DRC, I would say the most crazy country on the continent, that had 5 different names over 100 years, 5 different currencies, 5 different flags, 5 different national anthems. That's diplomatic. Now we call it Democratic Republic of the Congo, whatever that means. But Sami Baluji, so who's a young artist, but who's not from the capital, Kinshasa, who's from really the south, and DRC is one of the biggest by scale country. It's in Central Africa, but it stretches out to Southern Africa. And so he started as a photographer. Now he does also a lot of videos, and now he's into mapping more recently. And so this was his first series, and immediately was a hit. A hit for artist audience, a hit in biennials, he did all the biennials, but also a hit for the market, which is not a bad thing for him, as long as the 3 are connected. So this is a photo montage. DRC is known for being very, very rich. The earth, they have diamond, they have copper, they have gold, they have the rare materials that we use for computers, for mobile phones, everything comes from this country. And so in the 70s, all the mining factories were down there in the Katanga region, where he is from. And at the fall of Mobutu in the 90s, everything collapsed, economy collapsed. So all of these are these kind of metal beads. I'm fascinated as a former architect because for me it looks like dental of metal. It's completely abandoned, and it really tells the decay of this country that is really collapsing. And he combined that with photo montages of these indigenous people that were photographed by the Belgian colonizers. Belgium, it was the worst colony ever. DRC, the Congo. Would you think British are bad? They are not. You think even the Portuguese are bad? They are not. Belgian colony was the most horrifying. Forced labor, slavery. If the punishment you would not be jailed as a punishment, they would cut your hand or cut your arm they really traumatized the population of this area. And so you see, these are the kind of pictures that they would take, put it on postcards, and then distribute it in Belgium. And so that the kids, they'll say, oh, these are the niggers who are trying to save their souls, so that's why we're building churches, and we have to give them clothes because they were naked in the jungle, and etc., etc., etc. And so, and these kind of great things only happen in the Belgian colony. Brits and French and Portuguese didn't go that far in their craziness when it came to occupying the territory of other people. So he just took these these images of this decay, of what he thinks that is the decay of GRC today, and added this layer and just putting it, so it's about time, space, and saying there's not really a difference between the Belgian colony, the dictatorship of Mobutu, and where the country is today. So memoir is memory, and it's very, very large photomontage, photograph, very large prints. I have to go faster, huh? I'm taking too much time. Yes, yes, I'm at speed. That's what I told you. Next. So Amar Kouras, that's also something very iconic, who used archives of the Algerian War. Because, you know, French gave independence to all the territories south of the Sahara. So we didn't have any colonial law. But they wanted to keep Algeria in North Africa. But North Africans didn't want them to stay. So it was the most dirty independence war the French ever experienced. But because it was so traumatizing also for them, and that they were kicked out of the country literally in '62, they don't call it a war. They call it an incident. So French kids, they don't learn the history of the Algerian War in school. It's something that is still today under the carpet. And Amar Kouras, who's from Alger, in Algeria, has been looking at all these archives and of this dirty war. And he made this video based on a very famous poem by Hassan Ben Aj that says The Wall. And basically in this poem, he's a very famous writer, and he wrote this poem in the 61 that says, I swear on the body of my sister who has been raped for months for my French soldiers. I swear on the veil of my mother full of tears. So he's swearing on horrible things. So I swear, I swear, I swear. And at the end, the poem ends that I swear that I have no hate for the French people. So it's, and I even learned it in primary school, just to remind the sense of brotherhood that connects the entire continent. And Amar did this very simple video taking these black and white archives. So it looked like a slideshow. Some of them are films that he was able to find in the archives. So one screen is black, the other one is red. And you have the voice of the woman, very, very slowly, just saying this poem. So saying these horrible things, and like, I swear I don't have a hate for the French. And so we showed it in Bamako, and then the Malian government bought the video and then showed it like for a year at the National Museum. I have to speed up before he gets angry. So another artist who has been playing the identity, saying, I'm colored, I'm not black, I'm not white, I'm everything, and whatever you want, and I don't want to have conversations about identity. Let me play about it. That is Tracy Rose, who had a huge moment of glory in the late 90s, known for her radical performances at that time. She does photography, video, and now again she's doing performances. She's completely insane, crazy. She calls me auntie. And if you want to have the most crazy, insane experience in Johannesburg, if you go to South Africa, you call Tracy Rose. Next. I have to go fast.
Yeah.
But you wanted more?
No, it's okay.
I'm just considering time. I have a lot of things.
Yes, I know.
So Kofi Sengoji is another example of an artist who has been looking at history, but recent history. So he's from Ghana. He's from the elder generation. He was born at the independence of Ghana. And he saw the images on TV of the genocide of Rwanda. And then for him it was kind of a shock. And then he started thinking of what is my responsibility as a human being, as a citizen, as an African, because we're talking about a genocide in Africa, And how do I respond to this? How do I respond to this as an artist? So it took him like 3 years to build a huge installation that had many components and that gathered all the protagonists and all the different elements of this genocide. So you have the judges, you have the victims, you have the people who were calling on the radio for murder, you have the mass grave here next. Just to zoom in, so this was a huge, and he really showed it in a very dramatic way. So you enter a dark room, and you really have to feel that you're in a grave or that in a village that has been burned. And he wanted the audience to experience the shock, the pain, the guilt, and the uselessness that he felt when he saw those images on TV and decided, I have to do something about it. And so it was presented at the Dakar-based in 2000. So that was just for history, but I mean, it could go on and on and on of artists who are geography, movement of people, and how it also impacts who we are. Here, people come and go. I travel a lot, and today it's something banal, but that's interesting. So one project that for me is one of the best projects I saw until now today on the continent. It is a project called Editorial that was conceived by Godile from Cameroon, who passed away unfortunately in 2001. And this project was in 2006. So basically the idea was 7 of them, 6 from Cameroon, and a friend, an artist friend of him from Switzerland, next, would leave Cameroon here, this is Cameroon, and go to Dakar, only taking public transport. And the idea was to leave Cameroon, so to allow they left me here, arriving in Dakar for the opening of the Dakar biennial, and that would be their project for the Dakar biennial. Something also you have to mention, this is the map of West Africa as a region, but it's also a political entity. It means that all the countries have the same passport. Citizens, we have the same passport. And that started before Schengen and EU. And we often joke like that Western Europe experimented ECOWAS, because that's the name of the economic community of West African states, and to see if it works. But for us, of course it works, because before colonization already, it was like 2 big empires and 1 kingdom, and we're all part of that. So with this sense of we're just one nation, that was already something obvious, and 150 years of colonization, that's just, something very, very short if you look at 2,000 years of history. So we all have the same passport, with a free travel of goods and peoples and products. And so from Dakar, I can go to Nigeria only with my ID card. But if you're not from the region, you need a visa from each of these different countries, because there's not a West African visa. Because the kind of the territory is only for us. But it's not like you can have a Schengen visa. If you want to go to Nigeria and then to Burkina Faso and then Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Mali, you have to apply on the road for a visa if you're not from this region. And so their idea was, we've been told about this Pan-Africanism, one people, one nation, one destiny, we're all brothers and sisters. And people like Joachim in the 70s did travel and make experiments. So now, let's go from here to Dakar, only with the bus, public transport, and experiment what Pan-Africanism today. What does these borders mean? Because we're all saying these borders are fake. They were the colonizers. So on the road, they were building network, and they would stay in the capital, in each city for a week, having discussions with the local art scene. What is the responsibility of artists in society? What is this border? What does it mean to be Nigerian? What does it mean to be Ghanaian? What does it mean to be Malian? And how different is it for them that are coming from Central Africa, a totally different region? What is your context? What is the political context, the social context, the artistic context? If there's an art school, not an art school. So just really experiencing this Pan-Africanism, and they arrived at the Dakar biennial 3 days after the opening, because they were denied entry of Senegal. Because when they arrived here, from Bamako, they took the bus to arrive at the border. But it was the end of their journey. They were completely exhausted, covered with dust. And I just think that the Senegalese police officers at the border just thought that they were refugees. And from Central Africa, they just said, go back. We're not even giving you a visa. We don't need beggars. We have enough poor people in our country. Just go back. So they called the biennial to explain the situation, and they had to call the embassy, Senegalese embassy in Mali, in Bamako. So they went there to have the visa on their passport, and then went back across the border. But then they couldn't make it for the opening, so they arrived 3 days later. But when they arrived by collective, because during that biennial we were squatting the jazz club, so we organized the huge final discussion and showed, because during their journey they also had a blog where they were posting so people could follow the progress. Next is going to be another artist who deals with time and space and really does a lot of interesting projects in the public domain. That is Robin Rhodes from South Africa, who now lives in Berlin and has been really progressing in an interesting way, in my opinion, because I met him. He was really a kid, like doing kind of crazy stuff on the walls of the Dakar. Okay, so what? And now he's really mature, and I like the way because I'm interested in how people use space, public space, and I think this is for me one of the most inspiring examples of an artist who is using the public domain and interacting with the passerby in a very challenging way. Next. About geography, a lot of artists live abroad, so now we have this new African diaspora. And Anawana is one of them from Zambia, and she presented this at the 2006 Dakar biennial based on her experience when she first moved to Norway to study, and then she met a blonde, blue-eyed, tall, handsome Norwegian, married him, and decided to stay there. But the difficulty to speak the language when you're from Zambia, that is down in Southern Africa, speaking Norwegian. And so she made this video where she's licking salt until her tongue bleeds. And that was to talk about the difficulty to integrate, to be accepted, and to understand the language and to communicate with people. So there's no sound, she's just licking salt, and at the end you just want to say, okay, stop, this is too painful. Another artist, Sherouba from Senegal, who did this also about what does it mean when you travel and that you have to dive into another cultural environment, another society, and you're trying to find remarks and trying to adapt. So it's very simple and basic, as you see, walking on L-shapes. So he produced these thousands of ceramic eggs and did this performance in Switzerland, and then asked also people to take off their shoes and to walk carefully on the ceramic eggs without broken them. And not broken it means what you might be working on my culture can, if you're careful, then you won't hurt me as a black guy trying to live in Switzerland, and then he gave up, now he's back in Dakar. He can have a good studio in Dakar, I think that's the main reason. Kadia Aja, also an artist I've been following for a very long time, Algerian, who was born and grew up in France and also lived in Central Africa, lived in Spain, produces almost 90% of his production now in Dakar. So, but when he became a superstar artist, the French remember that he was French, so now they call him the French artist. So I said to the French, no, he's not French, he's Senegalese, because every December he's in Dakar producing his next installation that will be go abroad and to be in these big temples. So I just said to Kadia, now you just belong to the world, everybody can claim you, the Algerians, even the Congolese, because that's where you did your military service. And this was one of the first artists who looked at the African migrants who were crossing the Mediterranean. Now he's famous to talk about the Syrian refugees dying in the Mediterranean, but how many black people died at the turn of the millennium trying to cross the Mediterranean by boat, and nobody was really interested in that. And Kader was one of the artists who started thinking about it and just did this installation that is very simple with these graves. And I like the idea because it always is about empathy, of course, but also about otherness. Because you approach, and what do you see in the mirror? You see yourself. So it's also a kind of reminder of, pay attention to the lives of human beings. I have to speak up. This is a funny one also about history. It's a collective of three young, it's important to say, three young, blue-eyed, white South African girls that I invited to do a residency and an idea. I'm an ambassador. And I will only work with artists who are ready to pervert this idea of Africa is going to promote itself in Denmark. So these three girls came up with a project that basically was to do an ethnographic journey in Denmark. So just doing the reverse, like we had the ethnographic journeys, in the 19th century where Europeans were traveling in different parts of the world and scrutinizing and analyzing the culture of people. So they said, we're going to do the reverse, like we return to sender. So they came to Denmark, they did a residency, and they said, our project will be an ethnographic journey. We're going to stay here for 2 months and analyze Danish culture. And they produced this cabinet of curiosities, and they collected what they think was representative of Danish authentic culture. Next. So they went to all the tourist spots and collected all the junk. Next. And they said, this is authentic Danish culture, and this is authentic contemporary Danish art. Just the way in the 90s, because I had also a lot of conversations with them, about how it was difficult and how your culture is perceived when you're from a developing country, and that the West at that time thought that they were the only ones that they were interested. So they just did like an ethnographic curiosity cabinet from the 19th century, and they worked with a scientist. And you have all these captions like item number, so they would give the item a number, collected in this place by Dr. Bettina Marcolmes. And Bettina is just one of the artists. So they did it in this way, and they called it Here Comes a Lovely Land, because that's the title of the Danish national anthem. So that's how they called their, and so you entered this, and you had the song of the anthem in Danish. And it was interesting because the audience was totally furious, and for me that was the best thing to do. Just like, okay, this is what you did in the 19th century, so now you see how hurtful it is when somebody does it to you. So these are just images of their projects. And they produce postcards. And then they start shipping it to their critical look at it or to question it, that they will come up with a fiction. I really like that format, and so this is Morijak Banza, who's also from DRC, who is pissed off by United Nations, Red Cross, the High Commission for Refugees, all these people who have been having headquarters and offices in DRC trying to find a solution with the chaos of this country, but nobody's interested in finding a solution from the chaos, because the chaos then allows everybody just like to take and do their own business. So he decided that the only way he could question all these international organizations that he found were completely useless finding a solution to this country was to create a new one from scratch. And so he called it the Union of States, and it's supposed to be an international organization only for artists. So he did a mission statement, this is the currency. So he printed currency that he called the Mori, because his name is Morija. Next. And so he created the logo, the flag, the national anthem, and he presented that in an exhibition I did also with him. And so this was his response to this international organization. And at the opening of the exhibition, next, he delivered a speech in French that was about the typical United Nations speech, like all the people in the earth, solidarity, let's unite, this kind of boring rhetorics that are totally useless. So he did exactly, and using all those, so it was like a 1-hour boring speech, and he did it in French, and then he hired a student from the art school, because he's also interested in gender power. His mother is a very strong woman, and he wants to give tribute to her. So he's interested in the power game. So her role was to act as his secretary. So when he came down for the speech, they was like, ladies and gentlemen, put your hand on your heart and stand up for the national anthem. And then he sung the anthem because he used to be a church singer. And so she's walking 2 steps behind him very modestly. So he's saying in French and she's translating into Danish. And they have a very interesting body language, eye contact, that all is about the power game. So he delivered his speech and he was only looking at the mayor of the city. And at the end, he just went down to the mayor and said, now let me show you around. And the mayor was completely happy. And I was thinking, does he realize that we are actually questioning even him? But I think the mayor didn't get it, which was even better. Din Kule, just to give you a little bit that I'm not just interested about my African soup, or from artists from Samoa, but I'm also interested from artists when there's no time and I have to speed up. Yeah, so Din is one of the artists I've been following since 2003. I met him in Los Angeles. It's fine. Oh, but now it's too late, now I'm sweating. My God, oh la la. But it's then we can talk, So Din is one of the artists that I've been following, how he's using history, memory, and also empathy, thinking about all the people who went on exile, forced exile, or for economic reasons. And really trying to give a face to that page, to be a voice for those people. So this is an amazing, huge, massive installation he did in 2001 in Australia, when Australia was rethinking immigration policies and laws. And he did this exhibition, this project, really to remind the Australians that themselves are immigrants, and that they are occupying a foreign territory. And they also came by boat. So that's why he produced this 18th century boat, put it on the shore, burned it down, and filmed why it was burning. I think just the production cost helped, but he had a good ground for this. And so in the installation, so you have this broken boat, that is the typical boat of any refugee who is trying to cross a small portion of sea by boat, whether it's the Mediterranean or somewhere here in this Yellow Sea, with real rocks. And what you see on the floor that looks like sand, actually it's thousands and thousands of photographs that are facing down. Some are very small, like an ID photograph. And it's because he has been collecting for maybe the past 15 or even more years, family albums, photographs that he buys in antique shops in Washington City. And if you know, if you're familiar with his work, you will remember his big works where he cuts the photographs and then he weaves them and it becomes something completely distorted, different. So using photography and taking from his own collection is something he has been doing for more than a decade. And one day he had some of these photographs in his gallery in LA, and the woman started crying because she recognized herself and her sister on one of the photographs, on the Vietnamese woman. So, and I think that was the idea for him, that I have to give these images back to the people to whom they belong, but how do I find them? So part of this installation that is interactive is that there is a desk with a computer and a scan, and he started a website that is called erasure.net, and so the audience is invited to pick up a photograph, to scan it, and to upload it onto that website. So to build a database for the Vietnamese diaspora, if they identify themselves or one of their relatives, they can send an email, and then the original photo will be shipped back to them. So because he has a lot of these photographs. So the idea is wherever the exhibition happens, the audience is invited to participate in the chain of solidarity to build that what he calls the database of the lost souls. And for me, that's a real powerful political statement. You can think that it's about history, it's about memory, it's also about geography. But given the context of Vietnam, it's also a political statement. Next. Adriana Corrales. She's a young Texas-based American artist, but as you can see from her name, that her parents are from the other side of the border, from Ciudad Juarez. Do you know the crazy story / history of those small cities at the Mexican border with Texas, especially Ciudad Juarez? Yeah, I'm not you've seen her. Do you know, just to know if I have to tell the story of the audience? Yes or no?
Yes.
You know the story?
No.
No, that's what I want to know. It's one of the closest towns at the Mexican border to Texas. So it's like a transit for people, migrants, whether they come from Central America or even down deep. That's a kind of city that you will cross to enter the American border. And a lot of women disappeared on their journey to America. Of course, a lot of people disappeared, especially women. And they started finding mass graves. Because then the families were like, did she cross? We don't have the news. Or did she become human trafficking is involved, etc., etc. So Ciudad Juarez became in the international news. That's why I'm asking if you know about it, because I heard about it. But I always watch the news to catch up with what's cooking politically around the world. So Ciudad Juarez became this kind of symbol of Central American / North American migration journeys. And so in the mass graves, then you realize that these women, some were raped, some were tortured, some were murdered. And so of course the families are terrified, people are asking for compensation. So Ciudad Juarez became this kind of no-go city, the most shameful city in that part of the world. And Adriana, her family is from that side of the border, but even if she was born in San Antonio in Texas. And she is, she's completely obsessed by these stories, thinking, but my mother crossed the border, my grandmother crossed the border. Did something happen to them? Because her family never told her, and the dog doesn't want to tell her what was that journey about. So she started also researching on these women who disappeared, who they were, and so this is one of, and her entire, and she's very young, as you can see, 83 for me, that's young. Work is about this woman, these women who disappeared, and now she's looking at human trafficking, but in different parts of the world, also in America, but she's interested in other places, so she tried to find residencies to do research. She works with a lawyer from Argentina, because she really wants to ground root it into the reality. And she became like an activist. She was at the forum at the United Nations Forum about human trafficking with Angelina Jolie to give a speech. And so she's really using her artwork to advocate for the case of women and human trafficking. And so she did this installation with these, where she replicates like the body tag that you have for dead bodies, but into clay, and just hang them in a room. But she does, and all her work are connected to performances, to first understanding who are these women, the story about these women, trying to go back to the city where they are from, interviewing and just like to keep their memories alive, that they didn't die in vain for something that somebody is celebrating them. So it's almost like a kind of ritual. It even sounds spiritual when she does it, and this is just like the final part, but the process of producing and the performance, where she's producing the work, it's also a performance, and the audience is invited to help her produce the work, but it starts with praying, with meditating, with yoga, and with telling the names of all these women during the process and many things. So I'm really keeping an eye on her. And all her different works are very, very strong. So this is one of the artists, young American, of Latin American background artist I'm keeping an eye on, and she spent last year a residency in Germany, and I went to visit her, and we had very interesting conversations. So I'm also admiring somebody who is young and who is taking a stand for this kind of cases, and doing it in a very respectful and smart way, and now sitting on panels next to Angelina Jolie, who is just talking, but she is really experiencing and going back to the families and trying to make records on who are these human beings that are disappearing. Tiffany Chung, another artist I like very much, has also taken the case humanitarian causes as the starting point of a lot of her works. So this is one of her works in 2010 that is part of an exhibition that I opened 2 months ago in Denmark, Squatching the Walls of Memory. So again, it's about time and space. And so we have this army band and this school, how do you call this? School, I forgot it in French, in English. Like school backwards. And the idea is that the audience, people should come with humility, sit down on this vintage school desk, and read the testimonies that because she's also involved, she works for the Red Cross. She's currently volunteering for the Red Cross in Denmark because of the Syrian refugees. She did a lot of maps on the evolution of the Syrian camps in the Middle East, mainly between Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey. And it was exhibited at the Venice Biennial, so suddenly now she has her international coming out. And say, so, oh, now you're that Africans, you're also hype. Because in Venice, I couldn't even have a drink with her. Everybody wanted to interview her, but I'm happy that she's having finally attention. And what she did, so she's also on a lot of online forums of people who are still looking for their loved one, because sometimes the family were separated. Like the sister would be on one boat, the brother on the other, and they never found themselves. So she has access also to all the archives, because all these boat people were rescued by different boats, and actually it's the United Nations High Commission for Refugees that have all the records in Geneva. So every year, every summer, she goes to Geneva in the archives to find out who were the people in which boat, and then she's on the online forum and she receives emails from people saying, can you help me find, or my daughter was rescued by another, by a Vietnamese man, and I never had the opportunity to find that man. I don't know where he is, I don't even know how to find him, can you help me? So she's involved in that, and so she went further with this project, and she took testimonies from the First World War, Second World War, so from the Holocaust time, from the Rwandan genocide, from military coups, from civil wars, next. And just writing, so this is one of the testimonies. So she's not telling the name of people who this testimony is from, not telling where this person is from. Was it last year, a Syrian refugee? Was it somebody from the Rwandan genocide? Was it somebody from the First World War? So also again, this sense of time, space, and identity completely disappears, and it's about human condition, and about for the sake of humanity, I'm doing something, and my projects are going to be dedicated to raising awareness on all these humanitarian crises and traumas. Regina José Galindo, she's also, I think, maybe one of the most radical performance artists, who most of her performances are context-based, and mainly in Guatemala, where she is from, a country that has a very, very bad military coup and civil war. And so she is really an advocate for the genocide of the native Indians. She hates the politicians, the dirty job they've been doing. And so this is one of her very early performances where she's carrying this basin of human blood, and she puts footprints, and then she did a 40-minute walk from the presidential palace to the constitutional court as a matter of protest. Like, this blood is all the blood you have on your hands, so I'm going to put it on the public domain. So she just silently did that walk, and then just dropped the basin there, and then went back home and took a shower. And all her performances are filmed, and then if she's invited for exhibition, she will show some of the film, or if she's invited for a new production, she doesn't want just to come, and she wants to understand the place, whether the city, the country, the history, and see if she can find a connection before doing a performance. So sometimes she will be contacted and say, it's too short, I need time to understand the place, the context, or I'm not interested. Another crazy thing she did really to denounce the humiliation of the native Indians when the Europeans came to Guatemala, how they subjugated and humiliated the local population. So she would do these kind of crazy performances where she covered herself with dust, and so she's on the ground again in the public, and she never asked for authorization. And luckily nothing bad never happened to her. She's very small, she's half my size, just to tell you how small she is. And she asked people who were around, who would be interested, just to come and pee on her. So to experience the humiliation that women, because some of the Indian women, they would have forced abortion, or the genital organs would be taken up, so they would give birth to a next generation of monkeys. That was the official position of the militaries. And only 3 people accepted to pee on her. And then she took a shower, came back, and tried to have a conversation with people. So now do you understand the violence? It is, yes. So that's Regina. Another young artist who has been looking at the political history of the continent with the sense of one people, one nation, one entity. So this is a young Kenyan artist who created this bar. And it was a bar that was very popular in the 50s in Kenya, because this kind of bar were the only places where locals could sit down and discuss without raising suspicion from the British colonial authorities. It was a bar or a church. And so she created this installation called Harambee 63, taking 63 as a starting point because that's the year Kenya became independent. And that's also the time of the civil rights movements in America. So she's trying to make this big jump between African independence movements and civil rights movements and the fight for colored people around the world. So it's a 90-minute video that shows different speeches of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Fitzgerald Kennedy talking about the civil rights, and other personalities like Frantz Fanon, etc. And on the floor you have 63 pairs of gumboots. That is very symbolic in Southern Africa because that's what workers who worked in mines, that's what they would wear. And for a matter of them to communicate in the mines, they would just tap on the floor or tap on the boots to communicate. And then the first time they were demonstrating for better payment, they were doing this kind of warrior dance, but taking from the Zulu way of dancing, just tapping on the floor. And so it became also, the gumboot became the symbol of liberation, protest, and fighting for social rights, to a point that even a dance company was created called the Gumboot Dancers. And so she described the gumboots as this symbol of liberation, because R&B means liberation, and she put what she considers as the key figures of independence movement on the continent on the gumboots. And in a corner you have baby kids red gumboots, and for that's the next generation who will have to take a stand for something, and it's the gumboots of her daughter, who is very proud to tell everybody, I'm part of an exhibition with my gumboots. And so the idea is the audience should come, watch the video, listen to the different speeches, 90 minutes, have a beer, and discuss how they are going to change their own society wherever they live. And she's completely obsessed with history, African history, and how it's connected to politics. So of course, when I met her, I said, you're joining the crowd of people I adopted, now I have a Kenyan daughter. And we sat down like 5 hours just talking about politics. Another, of course, politics, you think of Angola, 40 years of civil war, a traumatizing Portuguese colony. So this is a young Angolan who grew up in Lisbon and lives between the two countries. And it looks very basic, it has a lot of humor because it's very, very small. And this idea of just mocking militaries, leaders, and so you have the king and the queen, and of course there are chickens, and the army behind, and the coffees in the front. That's all the people who are just basically pumped every time because these people are useless. So I also keep an eye on him, and this is the last one, a young artist I met at the Bamako biennial last year, because Mali is also facing a dramatic situation with Al-Qaeda in the Sahel. And they are trying to take over and transform the country. And I thought it was interesting because I was curious what would be the response of Malian artists to the current situation they've been living for the past 5 years or plus. And this young one did this series called Inshallah, which means, we all say it in West Africa because of the connection with Africa and all these constant Arab invasions that we had in the Middle Ages. So Allah, if God will, it's in the will of God. And so he did this series of photographs where so you have these jihadists, but the helmet becomes this kind of anonymous translating, but also this kind of helmet is the local basin that you put water in it, you put rice in it, you use it to cook, but then it becomes something completely different. And I was really, really interested about the intelligent way he found to talk about such a sensitive issue, because this Al-Qaeda is also starting to divide the societies in a part of West Africa. And some Muslims are becoming radical, and so we're a little bit completely lost. And I thought it was smart, delicate, intelligent way of dealing with religion and Islamism, and so I'm keeping an eye on him. And inshallah, I am here because we also say that a lot in Senegal, say Smallah, inshallah, yallah. And thank you. I apologize.
Yeah, thank you. So are there questions? I'm sure there are many questions.
Questions, objections, comments?
Comments, yes.
Objections?
Come on.
Yes.
Don't be shy.
Please. Or do you all need to digest on this empty?
Maybe just if you could expand more. You just say it in a very personal and in the surface way of the hype of what we're living, like
The hype of African art?
Yeah, that is a fashion. I mean, that happens in different regions.
Yes.
And can you, I mean, rather than just say it, I would like to hear it in relation to, because you've seen a kind of like progression of things, like what do you think is this moment and where is it leading to, or, yeah.
Well, I think what is interesting in this moment, if I refer to the early 90s, where I started, we were less than 10 interested in contemporary artistic production from the continent. And when I say less than 10, I mean really generous, I would say we were 5. On the scale of the continent, trying to meet people, doing research, but not as researchers, but just like trying, let's get the information out, and let's put it on the public domain, and let's share it with people. So all that generation of curators were all outsiders. I was trained as an architect, used to work as an architect, and was running an art magazine. Simon Jamy, the Swiss Cameroonian, used to be a novelist. Then we started Revue Noire as a magazine, and now he's a curator. Enwezor, the American / Nigerian / New York-based curator, was trained in political science, and then started also doing exhibitions. And from that generation, it's only B.C. Silva from Nigeria, who's the first actually who studied curatorial practice at the Royal College of Art in London. But all of us, we started out of necessity, the necessity that things have to be done. And we were tired of hearing all these stupid things about our continent, about our cultures, so we have to do it. Let's stop complaining and let's do it. So that was the first way. Now things are more formal. People go to and study curatorial practice. We have 2 generations of art historians. We have art critics. For me, when I was doing Revue Noire, I would hire a journalist and most of the time a philosopher or somebody teaching sociology. Because there weren't that many art critics on the continent. Now today you have a lot of art critics. You have blogs today, people are writing, you have websites. Institutions have their website. You have this kind of mushroom and boom of non-profit independent art spaces that started at the turn of the millennium on the continent. There was only one in the 90s that was in Cameroon, that was GawLab. Today, like in every city, you have at least 3 or 4 or 5. You have also a new generation of artists, this generation of artists, who have access to information, who have access to technology, who can very easily build networks by Facebook. My generation and the generation before us, Facebook didn't exist. So how do you know people? How do you meet people? How do you share ideas and discuss issues with people? You travel. And because we are only the few, the team of Revue Noire, that decided to put a lot of money and effort on traveling. So that's where we were going. And still, while we were doing that and putting on that on the public domain, people say, oh no, but this is Africa, we're not interested. And I agree with this those days when you will have an African show, and then the next month it will be an Asian show, and then the next day it will be a show for Latin America, as almost if it was like charity. And I remember after Africa 95 in London, the British would say, oh no, we're no longer interested in Africa, we got that. So we wait another 10 years. And then it was in 2005, Simon Jamy did Africa Reviews. And I said, for God's sake, can we stop doing African shows and just talk about art and issues? And then at the end he said, and by the way, some of them are from Africa. But can we just talk about the work and the issues and what are the artists dealing with? And stop putting people in boxes and into categories. That's why I'm more interested in how I look at history, geography, politics, how artists all over the world are looking at it. That's why I'm keeping an eye on Yuki from Samoa, I'm keeping an eye on Dean and Tiffany from Vietnam, and I'm keeping an eye on many other people, Adriana Corral from Texas, etc. So when people say, oh no, Africa is high, because you have more protagonists. You have much more creators, you have writers, you have publications. And now some African countries have their national pavilion at Venice. And even Angola won the golden line of the best pavilion. So now people are more talking about it. But I don't think it's just hype. I'm just thinking you woke up better late than never. But people have been doing things. And I'm just talking about me doing something from Europe and putting it in the Western domain. And not even mentioning all the people who are doing the work on the ground in the different countries. Like when Sue Jensen published like resistance art in South Africa, that was in the late 80s. But it's only like more than 10 years later that we knew about that one. So people have always actively been producing knowledge, understanding, context-based, different artistic proposal in their different countries. It's just about the exposure. The Revue Noire, we gave them exposure. But now, because you have so many protagonists, that now people, Western curators are traveling to those developing countries where they were not interested in before. Because now they are traveling, so now it's hype, because they are going. I'm sorry. So then, it's just an imposter. And because I was one of the protagonists who wrote that history, and because I'm going to very soon turn 50, I just decided I can behave like a bitch, and I won't have to apologize, and better think twice before you talk to me, because if you don't know your homework, and who was contributing very hard on tiny budget, why do you deserve 1 second of my attention? That's my position. Oh, there are questions.
Other questions?
Everybody's very quiet. Was it that worried? I spoke too much. You're like kind of, I have to digest this?
No, but it was also you were very self-explanatory.
Self-explanatory. Explanatory. I try. That's why this show in Denmark, I didn't want to have 100% artists from Africa. But the starting point is the most famous African novel, and I am myself an African. So it's just how you infiltrate Africa without having to state Africa. And I never put Africa in the title of my exhibition. That's why I had a huge problem with Simon when he did Africa Remix, because I don't think it makes very sense. Especially in 2005, where, a decade later. I'm not interested, because then it's only about me, myself, and I, and mine. And then you are perpetuating this kind of black crowd, but you are reinforcing the ghetto. Like, I'm black, I'm only talking to black people, I'm only interested in black artists, and nobody's speaking for me, so I'm going to defend myself. There was a time for that. That's why we had the Black Hunters. But I think that now we have to move on and share. That's why I came here to understand this context. And I see more and more artists from Africa being included into different projects done by non-African curators. And that's how it should be. So for me, this is what we did in the 90s. We had to do it because it was a state of denial. Everybody saying there's no contemporary art in Africa. I say, okay, we'll show you. So we did it, we and NKI did it also, and contemporary, and it's just like the new step of looking at it, but from a different perspective. But time has changed. Information is available. Nobody talks about art from the periphery and art of the center anymore. We're talking about art and about issues. So for me, it's refreshing. I feel relief. I don't have to justify myself, justify who I am, why I'm French speaking, but I speak and I write in English, why 90% of my network, professional network, is an English-speaking one, because I think the French-speaking people are so boring that we could just, drop them all in the ocean. That's good. Okay, good. And so for now, for me, the new territory to explore, as a post-neo explorer, this is Asia. So that's why I've been trying to find opportunities and efforts to go to this part of the world to understand also the context. Because before interacting with the artist, or even thinking of doing a project with the artist, I have to understand the history of the place and where the artist comes from, and the generations before, to make sure that I know what I'm talking about. Otherwise, I have the feeling that you're abusing and instrumentalizing artists and their work just for your own rhetorics. So I'm just trying to be honest and just traveling and learning about other cultures. That's so fascinating. I love that.
Are there any other questions?
After tomorrow, they're going to send you to not invite the Senegalese for a talk anymore. It's so exhausting. These people talk so much.
No, because they would have left
In Ghana, they would just politely be staying, but then you would receive a lot of nasty emails. Don't do this again. Don't do that.
Yeah, well, those emails were coming. Good. Well, thank you so much for staying for that.